Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished mopping the marble floors of the grand mansion. Her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals, and her back ached from bending over scrubbing surfaces all day. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m., but she couldn't leave yet. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, had given her a long list of tasks that needed to be completed before morning. The mansion belonged to Alexander, one of the richest men in the country. Maria had been working there for 3 months, but she had never seen him in person. The other staff members whispered that he was always traveling for business, making deals worth millions of dollars. To Maria, he was just a name on her paycheck, someone who lived in a world so different from hers that they might as well be on different planets. Maria's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She quickly pulled it out, hoping it wasn't Mrs. Henderson with more work. Instead, she saw her sister's name on the screen. Her heart immediately started racing. Never called this late unless something was wrong. "Maria, thank God you answered." His voice was shaky and filled with panic. He's burning up with fever and he won't stop coughing. I don't know what to do." Was 6-year-old son, Maria's nephew. He was the light of both their lives, a bright boy who loved to draw pictures and always had a smile on his face. Maria had been helping raise him ever since his husband left them 2 years ago. "How high is his fever?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice calm even though her heart was pounding. 104 degrees. I gave him the medicine we had at home, but it's not working. Maria, I'm scared. He keeps saying his chest hurts and his breathing sounds strange. Maria felt her world spinning. She knew these symptoms could be serious, especially in a child so young. "You need to take him to the hospital right now." "I can't," sobbed. "The car broke down yesterday, remember? And I called for an ambulance, but they said it would cost $800 just for the ride. I don't have that money. We used everything we had for rent this month." Maria closed her eyes, feeling helpless. She had been sending most of her salary to help with expenses, keeping only enough for bus fare and basic meals for herself. Her savings account had exactly $127 in it, not nearly enough for an ambulance or emergency room visit. "Let me think," Maria said, her mind racing. "Maybe I can borrow money from someone or—" "Maria, there's something else," interrupted. "Keeps asking for you. He's scared and he wants his Maria. Can you come, please?" The desperation in her sister's voice broke Maria's heart. She looked around the empty mansion, knowing she still had hours of work left. If she left now, Mrs. Henderson would fire her for sure. Jobs like this were hard to find, and Maria couldn't afford to lose the steady income. But needed her. Her family needed her. "I'm coming," Maria said without hesitation. "Give some water and try to keep him cool with wet towels. I'll figure something out." Maria hung up and stared at her phone. Lived on the other side of the city in a neighborhood where Maria had grown up. It would take her 2 hours to get there by bus, and the buses stopped running in 30 minutes. A taxi would cost at least $60, money she didn't have. She thought about asking the other staff members for help, but they had all gone home hours ago. She was alone in the massive house, surrounded by luxury she could never afford, while her nephew might be seriously ill. Maria walked through the halls of the mansion, looking at the expensive artwork and furniture. In the main living room, there was a crystal vase that probably cost more than she made in a year. The kitchen had a coffee machine that was worth more than her monthly salary. Everything around her represented wealth beyond her imagination, yet she couldn't help her own family when they needed her most. She found herself in Mister's home office, a room she was supposed to clean but rarely entered because it was usually locked. Tonight, the door was open. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His desk was made of dark wood and was bigger than Maria's entire bedroom at the small apartment she shared with two other girls. On the desk, she noticed a business card holder filled with cards. Each card probably represented connections that could solve her problem with a single phone call. But these weren't her connections. This wasn't her world. Maria sat down in one of the leather chairs facing the desk and put her head in her hands. She thought about her nephew, probably crying and asking for her while tried to comfort him. She thought about all the times had drawn pictures for her, always signing them, "For Maria, I love you." She thought about how he would run to her whenever she visited, wrapping his small arms around her legs and telling her about his day. The tears started flowing before she could stop them. She felt so powerless, so small in this big world where money seemed to solve every problem except the ones that mattered to her. Her phone rang again. This time it was, and she was crying so hard Maria could barely understand her words. "Maria, he's getting worse. His lips are turning blue and he's having trouble breathing. I don't know what to do. Please help me, I'm so scared." Blue lips meant wasn't getting enough oxygen. This was becoming life-threatening. Maria stood up quickly, her decision made. Listen to me carefully. Call 911 right now. Tell them your son can't breathe and his lips are blue. Don't worry about the money. We'll figure that out later. Life is more important than anything else." "But Maria, we can't afford." "Don't think about that now. Call them. I'm leaving right now to come to you." Maria hung up and ran toward the front door of the mansion. She would have to leave her job, leave all the security it provided. But she couldn't live with herself if something happened to while she was cleaning floors for people who had more money than they could ever spend. As she reached for the front door handle, she heard a car pulling into the driveway. The headlights swept across the windows and Maria froze. Someone was coming to the house at midnight. She wasn't supposed to be here this late, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be leaving in the middle of her shift. The car door slammed, and Maria heard footsteps on the front steps. Heavy, confident steps that suggested someone who owned the ground they walked on. She quickly stepped away from the door, her heart pounding for a different reason now. The key turned in the lock and the front door opened. A tall man stepped inside, silhouetted against the light from the porch. He was wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour, and Maria could smell his cologne from across the room. Even in the dim light, she could see that this man carried himself with the kind of confidence that only came from having power and wealth. Alexander had come home. Maria pressed herself against the wall, hoping he wouldn't notice her. She had never met him face to face, and this was the worst possible time for a first encounter. She was supposed to be working, not standing by the front door looking like she was trying to leave. But Alexander noticed everything. His eyes immediately found her in the shadows, and he frowned slightly. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was deep and commanding, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. "I'm Maria Santos, sir. I work here, I clean the house." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "It's midnight," Alexander said, stepping further into the room and closing the door behind him. "Why are you still here?" Maria's mind raced. She could lie and say she was just finishing her work. That would be the safe choice, the one that might let her keep her job. But her phone was buzzing again in her pocket, probably calling with more bad news about. "I was about to leave, sir," Maria said honestly. "There's a family emergency." Alexander studied her face in the dim light. He had the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything, to understand more than what was being said. "What kind of emergency?" Maria hesitated. This man was her employer, but he was also a stranger. Why would he care about her problems? But something about the way he asked the question, the genuine concern in his voice, made her answer honestly. "My nephew is very sick. He's only 6 years old and he has a high fever and trouble breathing. My sister can't afford an ambulance and I need to get to them." Alexander was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Where do they live?" "On the east side, near downtown. It's about an hour away by car." "And you were planning to get there how?" "Bus, sir, or taxi if I can find one at this hour." Alexander looked at her for a long moment, and Maria couldn't read the expression on his face. She expected him to tell her to get back to work, to remind her that her personal problems weren't his concern. Instead, he pulled his phone out of his pocket and made a call. "David, I need you to prepare the car immediately," he said into the phone. "We're going to the east side of the city." He looked at Maria. "What's the exact address?" Maria stared at him in shock. "Sir, I don't understand." "The address," Alexander repeated patiently. With trembling hands, Maria pulled out her phone and read her sister's address. Alexander repeated it to whoever was on the phone, then hung up. "Get your things," he told Maria. "We're leaving in 5 minutes." "Mister, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask, I offered." He was already walking toward the back of the house. "And call your sister. Tell her to meet us at Children's Hospital downtown instead of her apartment. We'll pick up your nephew and take him directly to the best pediatric emergency room in the city." Maria stood frozen in the hallway, unable to believe what was happening. Alexander, the billionaire she had never even met, was dropping everything at midnight to help her nephew. "Sir, the hospital bills." Alexander stopped walking and turned back to her. "Don't worry about money, just worry about your nephew getting better." Maria's phone rang again. This time when she answered, was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Maria, I called 911, but they said it would be at least 40 minutes before an ambulance could get here. Is getting worse. I don't think he can wait that long." "Listen to me," Maria said, her voice stronger now than it had been all night. "We're coming to get you right now. My employer is driving us to Children's Hospital. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Can you carry down to the street? Your employer. Maria, what are you talking about? I'll explain later. Just get ready to go. We're going to save him. As Maria hung up the phone, she saw Alexander returning with his car keys and a medical kit from somewhere in the house. Ready? He asked. Maria nodded, still not quite believing this was real. As they walked out to his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses, she couldn't help but wonder why this powerful man was willing to help a maid he barely knew. But as they drove through the empty streets toward her sister's apartment, Maria realized that maybe the answer didn't matter right now. All that mattered was going to get the help he needed. And for the first time all night, Maria felt like everything might be okay. The city lights blurred past the windows as Alexander drove faster than the speed limit, his expensive car eating up the miles between the mansion and its neighborhood. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, praying they would make it in time. The car pulled up in front of a rundown apartment building that looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. Paint was peeling from the walls, several windows were cracked, and the front steps were crumbling. Alexander had never been in this part of the city before, and the contrast between this building and his mansion was striking. Was waiting on the front steps, holding wrapped in a blanket. Even from the car, Maria could see how small and fragile her nephew looked. His normally bright brown skin had a gray tint, and his breathing was rapid and shallow. Maria jumped out of the car before it had completely stopped and ran to her sister. Looked exhausted and terrified, her usually neat hair messy and her clothes wrinkled from staying up all night with her sick son. Thank God you're here," whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's been asking for you." Maria took in her arms, and her heart broke at how light he felt. His little body was burning with fever, and she could hear a rattling sound in his chest when he breathed. His eyes were closed, but when he heard her voice, he opened them slightly. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't feel good." "I know, baby. We're going to make you better," Maria said, trying to keep her voice calm even though she was terrified. Alexander had gotten out of the car and was standing nearby, giving the family space but ready to help. Noticed him for the first time and looked confused. This is Mr. my employer," Maria said quickly. "He's helping us get to the hospital." Stared at Alexander in amazement. His expensive suit and confident manner made it clear that he was from a completely different world than theirs. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "Let's just focus on getting the help he needs," Alexander said gently. He opened the back door of his car. "Maria, sit in the back with him. You sit up front with me." As they drove toward Children's Hospital, Alexander called ahead to let them know they were coming. Maria was amazed to hear him speaking to someone who seemed to be expecting his call, even though it was now almost 1 a.m. "This is Alexander. I'm bringing in a 6-year-old boy with severe respiratory distress and high fever. We'll be there in 15 minutes. I want Dr. Sarah waiting for us in the emergency department." Maria had never heard anyone speak with such authority, as if the entire hospital would rearrange itself just because he asked. But apparently, that's exactly what happened. "How do you know Doctor?" Maria asked. "She's one of the best pediatric emergency doctors in the country. I helped fund the new children's wing at the hospital last year." Alexander glanced at her in the mirror. "We'll get the best possible care." During the drive's condition seemed to worsen. His breathing became more labored, and he started making a wheezing sound that terrified Maria. She held him close, whispering prayers and trying not to let her panic show. "How much further?" asked, her voice tight with worry. "5 minutes," Alexander replied, pressing harder on the accelerator. When they arrived at Children's Hospital, Alexander pulled up directly in front of the emergency entrance. Before they had even stopped, medical staff were coming out with a wheelchair designed for children. Doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and confident movements, was leading the team. "I'm Doctor," she said as Maria carefully transferred from the car to the small wheelchair. "How long has he been having trouble breathing?" "About 3 hours," answered. "It started as just a fever and cough this morning, but it got much worse tonight." Doctor was already examining as they moved quickly through the hospital corridors. She listened to his lungs with a stethoscope and checked his oxygen levels with a small device on his finger. "His oxygen saturation is too low," she said to one of the nurses. "Let's get him on oxygen immediately and prepare for chest X-rays." Maria and followed as far as they were allowed, but then they had to wait outside while the medical team took into an examination room. Maria paced back and forth in the waiting area, unable to sit still. Sat in a chair, crying quietly. Alexander had stayed with them, even though Maria expected him to leave once was in professional hands. He sat nearby, making phone calls to arrange things Maria didn't fully understand, but that seemed important. "The financial department has been," she heard him say to someone on the phone. "All expenses related to this case should be charged to my account. Yes, that includes everything. I don't care what it costs." Maria stared at him in shock. "Mister, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said simply, ending his phone call. "No child should suffer because their family can't afford medical care." An hour passed before Doctor came out to talk to them. Maria's heart was pounding as the doctor approached, trying to read her expression for good or bad news. "Has pneumonia," Doctor said. "It's serious, but we caught it in time. He's responding well to the antibiotics and oxygen therapy. His breathing is already improving." Maria felt her legs go weak with relief. Started crying again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than fear. "Can we see him?" asked. "Of course. He's been asking for both of you. But I want to keep him here for at least 3 days to make sure the infection is completely under control." As they followed Doctor back to his room, Maria couldn't believe the difference 3 hours had made. Was sitting up in a hospital bed, wearing a small oxygen mask that was helping him breathe. His color was much better, and his eyes were bright and alert. "Maria," he called out when he saw her, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask but much stronger than before. Maria hugged him carefully, mindful of all the medical equipment. "How are you feeling, baby?" "Much better. The doctor says I'm going to be okay." Looked around the room with curiosity. "This is a really nice hospital." It was a nice hospital, Maria realized. Its room was large and comfortable, with a television, a small couch for family members, and even a window overlooking the city. This wasn't the kind of room that her insurance would normally cover. Over the next few hours, as slept peacefully, and his breathing continued to improve, Maria found herself talking with Alexander in the waiting area. Had fallen asleep on the couch in his room, exhausted from the stress of the night. "Why did you help us?" Maria asked. It was the question that had been bothering her all night. "You don't even know us." Alexander was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city lights. "When I was age, I got very sick too, meningitis. My father was traveling on business, and my mother was alone with me, just like your sister was tonight." Maria waited for him to continue, sensing there was more to the story. "We were lucky," Alexander said. "My family had money and connections, the best doctors, the best hospitals, immediate care. But I remember being scared, and I remember my mother being terrified. No child should have to suffer, and no parent should have to choose between their child's health and financial ruin." "Is that why you donated to the hospital?" "It's one of the reasons. Money is just a tool. If you can't use it to help people when they need it most, what's the point of having it?" Maria had never met anyone like Alexander. The wealthy people she cleaned houses for were usually distant and cold, treating staff like they were invisible. But Alexander had not only noticed her crisis, he had immediately acted to help, without expecting anything in return. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Maria said. "You don't need to repay me, but I do have a question for you." Maria looked at him curiously. "What are your plans for the future? Do you want to be a housekeeper forever?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her about her dreams or goals before. I don't know. I never really thought I had other options." "What did you want to do before you had to start working?" Maria thought back to her teenage years, before her parents died and she had to drop out of school to help support and herself. "I wanted to be a nurse. I always liked helping people, and I was good at science in school." "How much school did you finish?" "Just 10th grade. After that, I had to work full-time." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in going back to school, finishing your high school degree and then nursing school?" Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I can't afford school. I barely make enough to help my sister with rent and expenses." "What if money wasn't an issue? What if someone paid for your education and made sure your sister and were taken care of while you were studying?" Maria stared at him, not sure if she was understanding correctly. "You're talking about years of school. Nursing programs are expensive." "I'm talking about investing in someone who has already shown she's willing to sacrifice everything for her family. Someone who rushes to help a child in the middle of the night, even when it might cost her job." Alexander met her eyes. "I think you'd make an excellent nurse, Maria." Before Maria could respond, Doctor appeared with an update on his condition. "He's doing wonderfully," the doctor reported. "The antibiotics are working perfectly, and his breathing is almost back to normal. If he continues improving like this, we might be able to discharge him tomorrow evening instead of waiting 3 full days." The relief Maria felt was overwhelming. Was going to be okay. As dawn broke over the city, Maria sat next to his bed watching him sleep peacefully. Had gone home to shower and get some clean clothes, and Alexander had left to take care of some business matters, promising to return later in the day. For the first time in her life, Maria allowed herself to imagine a different future. What would it be like to go back to school, to learn about medicine and healing, to be able to help families like her own when they faced medical crises? She looked at his breathing now steady and strong, and made a decision that would change everything. When Alexander returned that afternoon, she was ready with her answer. "If you're serious about helping me go to nursing school," she said, "then yes, I want to do it." Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since they met. "I'm very serious, and I think this is the beginning of something wonderful." 3 years later, Maria Santos stood in the graduation ceremony wearing a crisp white nursing uniform and a cap that represented years of hard work and determination. As she walked across the stage to receive her nursing degree, she could see Alexander sitting in the audience next to, and all three of them beaming with pride. The journey from that midnight emergency to this moment had not been easy. True to his word, Alexander had paid for Maria's education, but he had made it clear that the money came with expectations. She would need to maintain excellent grades, complete her studies on time, and prove that his investment was worthwhile. Maria had thrown herself into her studies with the same determination she had once put into scrubbing floors. She studied late into the night, often falling asleep over medical textbooks. She worked weekends in the hospital as a volunteer, learning everything she could about patient care. When other students complained about difficult classes or demanding professors, Maria remembered's frightened face that night and pushed herself harder. The first year had been the most challenging. Maria had been out of school for so long that she struggled with basic math and science concepts. She had to take remedial classes while also beginning her nursing prerequisites. Some days she felt overwhelmed and wondered if she had made the right choice. But Alexander had been more than just a financial supporter. He had become a mentor and, surprisingly, a friend. He checked on her progress regularly, not to pressure her, but to offer encouragement. When she was struggling with chemistry, he arranged for her to have a private tutor. When she was exhausted from balancing work and school, he reminded her why she had started this journey. "Remember that night," he would say. "Remember how helpless you felt when needed you. You're making sure no other aunt, no other mother has to feel that way if you're there to help." And had moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, also paid for by Alexander. Had been suspicious at first, wondering what this rich man really wanted from her sister. But as time passed and Alexander's support continued without any demands for personal favors, began to understand that some people really did want to help without expecting anything in return. had recovered completely from his pneumonia and was now a healthy 9-year-old who loved school and still drew pictures for his Maria. He often said he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, just like the lady who helped me breathe again. During her clinical rotations, Maria discovered that she had a natural talent for working with children and families in crisis situations. Her own experience with poverty and medical emergencies made her especially compassionate with patients who were scared and felt powerless in the medical system. One night during her pediatric rotation, Maria was working when a family arrived in the emergency department with a sick toddler. The parents spoke only Spanish and were clearly terrified, unable to communicate with the medical staff about their child's symptoms. Maria stepped in as a translator, but she did more than just convert words from one language to another. She sat with the mother, held her hand, and explained what the doctors were doing and why. "You saved my baby," the mother told Maria later, after the toddler had been successfully treated for a severe ear infection. "Not just because you spoke Spanish, but because you understood." That's when Maria knew she had found her calling. After graduation, Maria was offered several job opportunities, but she chose to work at Children's Hospital, the same place where had been treated 3 years earlier. Doctor, who had become a mentor, welcomed her to the team. "I remember that night you brought your nephew in," Doctor said. "I could see then that you had the heart of a nurse. I'm glad you found your way to us." Alexander attended Maria's first day of work, bringing flowers and taking photos like a proud parent. It was strange how their relationship had evolved. He was still one of the richest men in the country, and she was still a woman from a poor background, but somehow they had become genuine friends. "I have something for you," Alexander said as they stood outside the hospital after her first shift. He handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a beautiful stethoscope with her name engraved on it. But it was the note inside that made her cry. For Maria Santos, RN, who proved that helping one person can change the world. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. As months passed, Maria established herself as one of the most compassionate and skilled nurses in the pediatric emergency department. She was often requested by families who had heard about the nurse who spoke Spanish, who understood what it was like to be poor and scared, and who never gave up on a child. One evening, as Maria was finishing her shift, she received a call from Alexander. "Can you meet me at the coffee shop near the hospital?" he asked. "I have something important to discuss with you." Maria was curious but not worried. Alexander had never asked anything unreasonable of her, and their friendship had grown strong over the years. She found him sitting at a corner table, looking more serious than usual. "Maria, I need to tell you something," he said after she sat down. "That night 3 years ago when I helped you get to the hospital, it wasn't just a coincidence that I came home." Maria frowned, not understanding. "Mrs. Henderson had called me. She was worried because you were supposed to finish your shift hours earlier, but you were still there and seemed upset. She thought something might be wrong." Maria was confused. "But you said you just happened to come home." "I lied. I flew back from Chicago in the middle of important business meetings because my housekeeper was worried about one of my employees. Do you know why I did that? Maria shook her head. Because 3 weeks earlier, Mrs. Henderson had told me about a young woman who worked harder than anyone she had ever supervised, who never complained, never asked for special treatment, but who was clearly struggling to make ends meet. She said this woman always looked tired, always looked worried, but never let it affect her work. Alexander paused, looking out the window before continuing. Mrs. Henderson also mentioned that you often received phone calls from your sister, and afterwards you would look even more stressed. She was concerned about you as a person, not just as an employee. When she called that night to say you seemed upset, I knew I had to come check on you. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. You came back just to check on me. I came back because I recognize dedication when I see it. I built my business by finding people who care deeply about their responsibilities, who put others before themselves. When Mrs. Henderson described you, I knew you were someone special. But you didn't even know me. I didn't need to know you personally to know your character. The fact that you stayed late to finish your work, even when you were clearly upset about something, told me everything I needed to know. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. Maria, I've watched you grow from a housekeeper into an incredible nurse. You've exceeded every expectation I had. But more than that, you've become important to me as a person. Maria felt her heart start beating faster. Over the past 3 years, she had developed feelings for Alexander that she had tried to suppress. He was still her benefactor, still the man who had changed her life, and she had convinced herself that anything romantic between them would be inappropriate. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying that what started as compassion for a dedicated employee has become something much deeper. I'm saying that I've fallen in love with your kindness, your determination, your strength." Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "I'm saying that I would like to explore what might be possible between us if you're interested." Maria stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Alexander, you're a billionaire. I'm a nurse who grew up in poverty. People will say. People will say that a brilliant, compassionate woman made something extraordinary of her life and found love in an unexpected place." Alexander smiled. "People will say that sometimes fairy tales do come true." Maria thought about, healthy and happy in his new school. She thought about who had been able to quit her second job and was now taking classes to become a teacher. She thought about all the children she had helped in the past year, and all the families who would no longer feel helpless in medical emergencies because she was there to help them. "This all started because I asked for medicine for my nephew," she said, laughing through her tears. "No," Alexander said. "This all started because you were willing to sacrifice everything for someone you loved. The medicine was just the beginning." 6 months later, Maria Santos became Maria in a small ceremony attended by Dr. Mrs. Henderson and a few close friends. Served as ring bearer, proudly wearing a suit that Alexander had bought him for the occasion. During the ceremony, Alexander spoke about how love sometimes appears in the most unexpected moments, and how the most important things in life can't be bought with money, but must be earned through character and kindness. Maria spoke about how sometimes angels appear as billionaires who rush to help in the middle of the night, and how the best medicine for a broken heart is finding someone who believes in your dreams. As they exchanged vows, Maria remembered that desperate night 3 years ago when she thought her world was falling apart. She had asked for medicine but what she had received was so much more. She had found her purpose, her calling, and now 12 and dreaming of medical school. Later said it was the best wedding he had ever attended, even though it was the only wedding he had ever attended. Maria looks like a princess, he whispered to during the reception. She looks happy, replied, watching her sister dance with her new husband. That's even better than being a princess. Today, Maria works as the head nurse in the pediatric emergency department at Children's Hospital. She has helped hundreds of families navigate medical crises, always remembering what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. Alexander and Maria have established a foundation that provides emergency medical assistance to families who can't afford it, ensuring that no child ever has to wait for treatment because their parents can't pay. And now in high school still draws pictures for his Maria. But now he signs them for Maria, who taught me that love is the best medicine. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest request for help. And sometimes, when you ask for medicine, the universe sends you exactly what you need to heal your heart. But Maria had no idea just how much her life was about to change, or that agreeing to accept Alexander's help would lead to consequences she never could have imagined. Neither of them spoke during the drive, but Maria could feel that this midnight ride was the beginning of something that would change her life forever. She just didn't know how much.